Wait till the owners find out how much I want to stay here next year.
Wait till the fans find out how much I raise ticket prices next year.
Wait till they both find out whom I root for next year.
Everyone, welcome to Park Ridge Sports History. This is Will O'Toole. I'm going to take you over the next half hour to talk all things sports. And I hope you all had an enjoyable summer. I know I did. It was very restful, relaxing. Howard and I took a break, maybe to give you guys a break as well. But just intense what Howard does in terms of producing the show after I send him the very primitive form like I'm doing right now. But he does, I only have great respect and admire all that he does to add to this show, the music and the short, the pictures and all the rest of it. So without further ado, I'd like to talk about this week's subject, and that is the Chicago White Sox. I recently did an article, hoping to have it published, about how I'm rooting for the White Sox to win 41 games so that they will never, ever take the place of the 62 New York Mets, who have really become, and we're going to study a little bit about that Met team, because unlike this White Sox team, and of course I'm talking about this as a New York metropolitan based sports fan and not Chicago, but as you got older and as you heard more of the stories of that 62 Met team and the fact that they were just, basically it seemed like they were just stepping on each other's toes and falling and slipping and sliding all over the place. There was a certain charm with that Met team. And that 62 Met ball club, winning only 40, won the hearts of 40 million baseball fans because of their ineptitude. I don't think the White Sox, and I think it is part generation. Obviously, I'm much older than I was way back. Listen, I was too young to even remember that 62 Met team, but I just remember the stories my dad and my brothers used to tell me about them. And of course, if you listen to Ralph Kiner and Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy growing up, there was a certain nostalgia attached to that team, and they enjoyed talking about everything that went on with that Mets ball club. I mean, and this is what I'm going to do for the next half hour, is break that club down, which isn't hard to do because they were terrible beyond just terrible beyond even thought. But they were a team, put it this way. In the 1960s, of course, New York was without a National League team. And of course, if you were a Dodger or a Giant, there was no way that you're going to turn your allegiance to the New York Yankees. Or most didn't. Let's just say that. There are certain guys that are just New York fans, so they would just attach themselves to the Yankees. But as I always like to say, if you're a Ranger Islander fan or a Ranger Devil fan or a Yankee Met fan, if it comes to Game 7 of a playoff series, who are you rooting for? That's where your real allegiance is, after all. So even though I like certain teams, yeah, I think that when it comes down to that last game, you're rooting for the team that really is close or is in your heart. So you really can't be both a Yankee and a Met fan. Yeah, I get it. You can be a New York fan. But that being stated, when the Dodgers and the Giants left New York, my father, who was a huge Dodger fan, felt abandoned. My mother-in-law, who I've spoken to, she was a big Campanella fan, hates the Dodgers to this day. And she is the typical love-hate. She's gone from loving the Dodgers to absolutely can't stand the Dodgers anymore. It is amazing. So that team, when it left, really broke the hearts of many New York fans, especially, obviously, the National League fans. Giant fans, of course, either they just went without baseball or they rooted for the Giants in San Francisco. Same thing with the Dodgers in Brooklyn. They rooted for them in L.A. And there were some people who continue to root for the Dodgers and the Giants. All right, so there was a huge vacuum. The Continental League, was the brainchild or one of the founders, quote unquote, of this league that was forming the Continental League was Branch Rickey, ex-Pirate general manager, ex-St. Louis general manager, I believe, and of course, Brooklyn Dodger general manager, Hall of Famer, right? Broke the color barrier with the signing and integrating of Jackie Robinson onto the Brooklyn Dodgers. So he is all things baseball. He is one of the most important pieces of baseball history and to the success of the game, not just as an American sport, but as a global sport. Anyway, there were rumors they're going to have teams. They're going to have teams in, let's say, Minneapolis and Houston and New York and in other venues. Baseball stopped them short and said, listen, we'll expand. So their first expansion was to Los Angeles, the LA Angels, and to Washington, D.C. after the original Washington Senators left D.C. and going to Bloomington, technically, Minnesota Twins. Baseball said they would fill the void left by that. So they reintroduced the new Washington Senators. And if you don't know, they are now the Texas Rangers, moving after the 71 season to Arlington, Texas, where they've actually played in those 50 years in 3 different ballparks. It's pretty amazing. New York was also going to have a team. So Major League Baseball said, no, we'll expand again. And Houston was a rumored team in the Continental League. So they chose Houston and they chose New York in 62. They would be the expansion teams. Fast forward, 1962 now. This is the late 60s, maybe 60, 61. The Mets and their front office have a huge, all of a sudden, following, and they know that they were going to get a bigger following if they brought back. They didn't really do a good job, let's just say, scouting the players. In fact, many, not all, I think it's about 10 of the 45 players that played for the New York Mets in 62 had some affiliation or some way were connected to the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And in fact, here are some of the players that they had on that original team. You have guys like, and I'm going to go through these again. You have Gil Hodges, of course, a Brooklyn Dodger. Did finish his career with the, he did go out to L.A. He won another World Series with L.A. You have Felix Mantilla, not in any way affiliated with either the Dodgers or Giants. You have a guy by the name, he was always referred to, when I was a kid, I always thought Al Jackson's name, his first name, was Little, because all of the sportscasters always started talking about Jackson with Little Al Jackson. He was I got to be honest with you, not a bad pitcher when you look at it. And the other player, of course, that is Marvelous Marv Throneberry, who was a Yankee. Now, wait a minute now. But the first manager of the Mets was, of course, Casey Stengel. And that's the whole point. When you look at the that New York Met, this is why they're so charming. Casey Stengel, at 72 years old, was the manager of the original Mets. And even that, the original Mets. And of course, he is the one who gave them the nickname, the Amazings. He had so many quips, so many anecdotes, so many stories. The only runs they scored were out of Casey's mouth. How many run of words he could have in 30 seconds. I mean, he was a great spokesman for the franchise in that early years. They really didn't have much else because the team flat out stunk. So having Casey as a guy that you could go to in the locker room for a story or a quote made the team even more charming. And believe me, rooting for that team must have been, if you were taking that team seriously, it must have been incredibly hard because in their first, let me just say this, New York, ready for this? Here was some of the guys. Let me go over that and then I'll talk about that. You have Frank Thomas, who was a good power hitter, but of course he was 33 years old when he joins the Mets. He did hit 34 home runs, courtesy of the short wall in left field of the Polo Grounds where the Mets originally played. Choo Choo Coleman, all right, was one of the Mets catchers. And of course, the famous story with Choo Choo is that Ralph Kiner asked him one time, Choo Choo, where did you get your nickname? And he said, I don't know, Ralph. He was just born Choo Choo. And of course, one of my favorite cards, and of course, I have to, there are 3 or 4 shows I've promised to do. One is the 66 Notre Dame. We won't talk about them. Notre Dame, Michigan State game. A lot of fiction about that game. We'll get to that. Another one, though, is this baseball book that my brother Eddie bought me when I was a kid for Christmas. And it's called The Great Baseball Card, Bubblegum and Trading Card, or The Great Baseball Trading Card and Bubblegum Card book, or words to that effect. And in it, it has just the old baseball cards, and that's why I love to show them too. The old baseball cards from the 50s and the 60s and the early 70s that these guys, these authors, collected, and then they would just give little paragraphs or little essays about the players. Some are important essays, like one on, well, not even an essay, important little quips about great players like the Ted Williamses and the Jackie Robinsons, and others are about maybe the more footnote players in baseball history. But one of the cards that they do have, and of course, it's totally in making fun of Casey Stengel, is Casey Teaches. And of course, that's Ed Kranepool, an original Met, brought up from Brooklyn, age 17, makes the All-Star team in 65, never plays for any other franchise. And remember, I did a show earlier about guys who were never Hall of Famers, but maintained their entire career with one club. And I said the Mets had Kranepool, the Yankees had Roy White, and then the Detroit Tigers, that would later go on, had 3 or 4. I made a mistake about Dwight Evans, saying I thought he was always a Red Sox, but he shows up as an Oriole in his last year and then retires. But there are many guys who don't make the Hall of Fame. And by the way, Evans should be probably, he's right there as a cusp Hall of Famer. He probably should be up there in the Hall of Fame. Cannon arm, great, really good stats. He would be a superstar today with what he did on the playing field as it relates to today. Anyway, so Kranepool actually played for the Mets his entire career, became a pinch hitting specialist later on. I think he had a .438 batting average as a pinch hitter one summer. He makes the 65 All-Star team. Unfortunately for Kranepool, didn't appear in the game, but still, hey, even being named to the All-Star team, knowing that you're not going to, well, probably you're playing on the worst team until 1969 in the major leagues, it's still got to be something special. Even if you don't even hit in the game or play or run or field, it's got to be just a great feeling. So that is Eddie Kranepool. Other guys they had on the team. This is how crazy the Met team was. They didn't have 1, but 2 Bob Millers. And if you can, I got to be honest with you, I really, outside of the baseball hat and maybe the crew cut here for this Bob Miller, I can't tell the difference of them. And of course, they were both right-handed pitchers. They were both about the same height, the same weight, and they both performed just as miserably as the other. Together, they went 4-12 that year for the New York Mets. And of course, everybody remembers Don Zimmer, who managed the Red Sox in '78, and then would later on become one of Joe Torre's right-hand men with the New York Yankees. Managed the Cubs, I believe. He actually managed the San Diego Padres in their first couple of years. Not too well. That team wasn't too good, but they didn't have the nostalgia that the New York Mets of '62 have. But of course, probably, and I know this sounds kind of crazy when I say this, Zimmer went to the same high school, I believe, as Pete Rose, Western Hills in Cincinnati, and they apparently had some great ball clubs out there growing up. He was quite a high school standout. Obviously, makes the major leagues. Does have Brooklyn Dodger affiliation. He does play for the Cubs and winds up with the Mets. But he is one of those guys, unfortunately, you never know what his career could have been. Remember, he got pegged in the head, and it's really because of his concussion and the number of days, I think, that he had to stay in the hospital that we really have, or baseball really made it a matter of safety to have the players wearing the batting helmets. And of course, one of the last guys, this is a great trivia question, one of the last guys, because there was a grandfather's rule in place that you didn't have to wear one. One of the last players not to wear a helmet was a guy by the name of Bob Montgomery, who did play with the Red Sox. He actually wore, I think, a heavy liner in his baseball cap. There was a guy, I think, for the Pirates that did the same. It's not Jose Pagan. It was somebody else who did it, I believe, for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But Bob Montgomery is supposedly the last guy not to wear a baseball helmet. And of course, today they're wearing it. Now you have to wear it with the ear flaps. And it's interesting that Bob Montgomery, and now I'm going off on a tangent. I don't really care because this is important. It's ironic that a Red Sox is the last one to not wear a protective helmet, because unfortunately, in the late 60s, Tony Conigliaro, a rising star, superstar for the Red Sox, was beamed in the face by a pitch by, I think, Jack Hamilton. And of course, he was never the same. Lost vision, was temporarily blind, did come back, never had the same vision. And unfortunately, many people thought that he died prematurely because of the beating that he sustained. Purely accidental, but Tony C was definitely a rising star in that late 60s Red Sox. And it would have been interesting to see what the Red Sox would have been like had he been a healthy player his entire career. He was on that impossible dream team, by the way. All right, so you have Zimmer. Of course, you have Casey Stengel. Maybe if I have time, I'll read this, Casey Stengel's thing. And Chris Cannizzaro played for the Mets. Now, why it's interesting, Cannizzaro, is because he's actually the first All-Star for the San Diego Padres, 1969. I don't believe he got into the game, but of course he was named more a defensive specialist than anything on the offensive end. And I am certainly not making, when I jest and joke, it's not making fun of the players' talents, because they have more talent in their fingernails and they clip than I ever did my entire body. But yeah, Cannizzaro was seen more as a defensive guy than anything offense. And of course, this is Richie Ashburn. Now, he is a Hall of Fame player with the Philadelphia Phillies. He's on the Whiz Kids. I didn't realize this. What I love about this show, and what it does provide me, I did, and then didn't, and then did, and then didn't know that Ashburn, you just always assume that players like him stayed with the Phillies. But no, even the Phillies got rid of him later in his career. Wound up with the Cubs, played there a couple of years, and then the Cubs let him go at age 35. He goes to the Mets, hits 300, makes the All-Star team. Here's a good trivia question. He's actually their first All-Star representative with the New York Mets. But here's the deal. And this is first of all, Ashburn has always been, when I was in high school, we got cable. And one of the cable stations that we had was WPHL, I think it was. And they carried the Philadelphia Phillies. Mostly their away. Here's how they worked it. They did all their away games. And I think they definitely showed all their Sunday games. And then they would show selected games during the week. And I think they would show some Saturday games. Nevertheless, Ashburn, along with Harry Callis, and there was a couple other guys that names I can't recall, but Ashburn was one of the announcers. He was the color guy, like Ralph Kiner was, and he had great stories. He didn't. One thing that I've said this before. One thing that we were very privileged about was having not one but 6 great sportscasters for baseball, the Yankees and the Mets, growing up. Mets, I'm probably going to be a little bit more biased because I watched Met games more than I did Yankee games. They had Kiner, Lindsey Nelson, who was a fantastic voice, play-by-play, and of course Bob Murphy. All of them had their own styles. All of them had beautiful voices. And with Ralph Kiner, you've got great baseball stories. He had great baseball knowledge, and not just about his team, but about the history of the game. In fact, I learned I think his name was Fleetwood Walker, was actually the first black player to break the color lines, although he passed himself off as another ethnicity, maybe American Indian or something like that. But it was because of Kiner that I really got involved, and my brothers too, in the baseball history. But he knew everything. And one thing he did, I do remember and appreciate, he was not a big fan of Branch Rickey. They did not see eye to eye. And of course, Kiner, Nelson, and Bob Murphy were the original sportscasters for the New York Mets in '62. So you're talking about three guys who were at the very beginning, were there in '69 and '73, and up until pretty much either they got sick or retirement, they were with the Mets up until almost the turn of the century. And Kiner used to tell stories about Branch Rickey. I know that Kiner was really good friends in his last couple of years with Hank Greenberg. They would talk nothing but hitting. And of course, Greenberg, didn't know this until I did a trivia question, actually finished his career not with the Tigers, but with the Pirates. And actually, I think led the Pirates in the National League actually in walks his final year in the major leagues. But Kiner, he had the famous Kiner's Corner TV show, which I would love to see if they could ever bring that back. But unfortunately, I don't think so. And I'm talking about the original ones. In '62, he had that, I believe, Kiner's Corner show. And that's where he asked Choo Choo about his nickname. And that show was often, it was so campy. It was great. And they put up these fake walls. I think during one of the programs, one of the walls fell. It all just added to the luster and nostalgia of the New York Mets of '62. Now, why do I all say that? Well, let me just finish this up. But anyway, real quick, with Ashburn wins the MVP for the team. He's elected the team MVP. And the story goes, Ashburn tells us that they gave him a boat, and a nice boat, apparently. I don't think it was a yacht, $135 million yacht, but I know it wasn't a canoe, a raft, or a little rowboat. And they gave him a boat, and when he went to put it into the water the first time, the boat sunk. Here is a fellow by the name of Willard Marshall. Now, he never played in New York or for Brooklyn. He never played for the Giants, but actually he did play, I think, 1 year for the San Francisco Giants, but he came up through the system. So you see where I'm coming from. The other guys that they had who were New York Mets that had Brooklyn tie, well, Marv Thornberry and Casey Stengel and Jim Coates, former Yankee, actually made one All-Star team 1960 with the Yankees, won 11 or 12 games, 13 games for that 60 ball club. It was the only All-Star game, and I think it was the only time he ever had a winning record in baseball. But anyway, those three from the Yankees. Then you had Hodges and Zimmer. All right. Eventually they would have Snyder, but he's not on the '62 team. From the Giants, you had this guy Marshall, and so they were. The Mets didn't draft for young players. They drafted definitely for fan identification. When you have 10 of your 45 roster spots from former players in New York, you're looking to maybe grow the product and really make it. And just going back, maybe it made sense what the Mets did to give the fans a sense of nostalgia, to say, hey, look, we got a new ball club in town. We want to hearken to the Brooklyn Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants, and even to the Yankees. So maybe you bring back those abandoned Dodger and Giant fans now who flocked to the Yankees. Now maybe you bring them back to the National League and to the Dodgers and Giants and the group. That's why the Mets are royal blue and orange, the colors of the Giants and the Dodgers. It was brilliant. All of that was great, brilliant marketing. However, the players that played, ready for this, Chris Cannizzaro, no homers, 9 RBIs. They gave him 59 games, and he hit .241. Oh, Charlie Neal was another. He was another Dodger. Actually, was an all-star. He He had 11 homers, 58 RBIs, hit 260 for that team. Elio Chacon, 2 homers, 27 RBIs, 236. Felix Mantilla, who was, I believe, a Brave and also a Red Sox, he had 11, 59, 275. The big two hitters for the Mets were Frank Thomas, 34, 94, 266. But of course, he was like 33 years old and would later go on and play for the Phillies of 64 or 65. He had played with the Pittsburgh Pirates, had made a couple of all-star teams, had some productive years with the Pirates. Jim Hickman, of course, I know Hickman from 1970 because I thought he was a superstar. He actually made the all-star game over Billy Williams. And Hickman that year in 1970, I think he had 38 home runs. He had a monster year, his greatest season ever. 32, 115. He hit 315. He had 93 walks out of 419 on base percentage. It was the only all-star team he ever made. It was the only time he ever hit 30 home runs. He did have double-digit home runs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 times. When I say double digits, 19, 17, 11, 17. Did have one year, 21, 54, and 69 for the Cubs. Hit 237. Hickman, of course, here's another trivia question. Hickman, of course, was had the game-winning hit in that 70 All-Star game. Drove the ball up the middle off Angels pitcher Clyde Wright. Of course, the throw from center was there. Boom. Rose collided with Fosse. Fosse's career was forever changed. And, of course, Rose scores the winning run. And if he was not known in the country, he became a household name after that 70 All-Star game. I know he had 1, 2 previous batting titles, but still, maybe a little bit more parochial with just National League fans. That probably put him on the stage. But compare those teams with today's 2024 White Sox. And I am not in any way, shape, or form knocking the White Sox at all, but it's a different feeling today. This team, I'm almost angry with that they haven't won 40 games. Right now, going into this taping of the show, they're 32 and 111, 5th place in the Central, which is dead last. They've undergone 2 different managers. Pedro Grifol, who was 29 and 8 or 28 and 89. He was 61 games under 500. And Grady Sizemore right now, he's lost 22 of his first 26. And here's the thing, the Bill James Pythagorean win-loss. Now, all I can say is this. If you don't know who Bill James is, he's probably one of the originators of baseball metrics. There are other guys, Arnold Roth, who kept statistics for baseball broadcasts that you should have a shout out because there was he did some statistical analysis too, but it was really Bill James who brought metrics into the forefront in the late 70s, early 80s. The Pythagorean theorem or the Pythagorean theorem for wins losses is based on the number of runs you score and the runs you give up. And for whatever reason, he doubles them or squares them and then comes up with a formula that should equate to the number of wins. He has them winning 39 games and going 39 and 104 right now. All right, so that would give you 143 wins. So what he's saying, or what this is saying, is that they are right now 7 games underperforming. And if they were 39 and 104, I'd feel pretty good right now because they would probably break the 40-win barrier. And right now, they're 32 and 111 after 143 games. And if they kept up with this winning percentage, they'd only have 36 wins at the end of the year. This team is comprised of, they're younger. The Mets were, I think, 29. The average age, at least of their starting, just doing an early thing, looks to be about 26, 27. They do have 3, 4, 5 guys already in double digits in homers. The leader is Right now, Andrew Vaughn, their first baseman, 17 homers, 62 RBIs, 240 batting average. One thing that they have a ton of are guys who have struck out in the 100s. They have 5 guys with over 100 strikeouts. The Mets of 62, just to give you an idea how the game has changed. Ready for this? The Mets of 62 had nobody strike out 100 times. They did have 3 guys who struck out 90 times, but that's over 162. The White Sox are only at game 143, so they have another 15 games. Some of them might be up at the 120s by the end of the season. Their on-base percentage for the Mets, well, put it this way. The Mets had 5 guys in double figures in home runs. The leader, of course, I said, was Frank Thomas, 34 and 94. Marv Throneberry was second with 16, 49, 244. Throneberry, some great stories about him as well, and I can't think of them right now, but it's like, I don't know, they supposedly had a surprise birthday party, I think, and I'm probably telling the story wrong, but let me just see if I got it somewhat right, some of the elements. But apparently he comes into the dugout or the locker room. They have a surprise birthday party waiting for him, and they cut up all the cake, and they had none for him. And I think one of the guys said, "Don't worry, Marv. We know that if we gave you a slice, you probably would have dropped it," because Marv was not known at all for his defense. And but even he, 83 strikeouts. 1649. Throneberry's career, he did play for the Yankees and for Kansas City. Played 3 years with the Yankees. He played 1 game in 55. He played 60 games in 58 and 80 in 59. Then was shipped off to Kansas City. Then came back with Baltimore or to Baltimore. And then wound up with the Mets. And in his first year with the Mets, age 28, 1649, 244. I would say that's his best year in the major leagues. And in typical Marv Throneberry fashion, in typical 62 New York Met fashion, the next year, age 29, he gets 14 games and he's out of baseball. But of course, most guys my age who never saw Throneberry play probably remember him from the light beer commercials of the late 70s, where he was really, really funny. His timing was impeccable. He was great. And it's too bad that he didn't go into acting instead of baseball. No, I'm only kidding, Marv. I'm only kidding. Believe me. I just want to see if he did get into the postseason with the Yankees. He does. He had 1 at-bat against Milwaukee in the 58 World Series that the Yankees won, but he went 0 for 1. But at least, hey, I can laugh all I want at Mark, but you know what? He's got a World Series ring. I don't. The only ring I get for the World Series is when my buddy calls me up and says, "Are you watching the game?" That's the only ring I get. Anyway, Marv Throneberry is on that team. Now, where you have a where you had a Hall of Famer, Richie Ashburn, being selected, here's for the All-Star team, the All-Star pitcher selected for the American League from the White Sox was Garrett Crochet. Here's the shame of it. He's really not a bad pitcher. And of course, probably he will be dealt away and maybe pieces come back that you can rebuild this team. Don't forget, and here's the other aggravating thing about this White Sox team. And I'm going to show you some more here. I didn't get any pictures of the White Sox. Here's how else the Mets and the White Sox differ. The Mets were in their infancy. They were brand new. The White Sox were a playoff team 3 years ago. They won 93 games. And then, you can have a down year even as a playoff team. But then they were 81 and 81. Then I think they won 65 games. And now to this year's debacle. So it's really not fun. The Mets, winning only 40 games in 62, were in their infancy. They built the team to maybe attract baseball fans, specifically Dodger and Giant fans, the colors, playing in the Polo Grounds. Well, they could have probably played in Yankee Stadium, but I don't think that would have been a good environment. Not a good good backdrop, even though the Yankees did it playing at Shea in the 70s while Yankee Stadium was being rebuilt. So they have all that going for them. They have charm. They've brought baseball back. The White Sox have been here since forever. They play in a park that is not charming, that has undergone 3 or 4 naming, all because of sponsorship and all the rest of it. I couldn't even tell you what the name of the park is offhand. I have to look it up. I like to see it as Comiskey Park. Comiskey Park 1, Comiskey Park 2. This is a team that is only, it seems like a lot, but they won a World Series in the 21st century, 2006. This is also a team that does have a permanent stain with the Black Sox scandal. Although I know most of the guys were acquitted, if not all of them, and but many of them were banned for life from the game of baseball. I'm not here to judge those guys. I'm just saying it's just a different circumstance. And I really think it would hurt baseball if that 62 Met team never kept the that special connection with baseball, and that is the worst team ever constructed in baseball history. Charming, nostalgic, and bringing baseball, and that's the other thing too. They were bringing baseball back as an institution to the New York metropolitan area. And for all those guys who like the Yankees, and of course, rooting for the Yankees, someone said one time, is like rooting for U.S. Steel with the pinstripes are forever and all the world championships. All that's great, because I do root for a team kind of like that with Notre Dame, with the banners and the championships and the lore and the legend and the myths and all the rest of it. So there are many haters of Notre Dame for the same reason there are many haters of the Yankees, because they win. And when they lose, it is something to celebrate. But what baseball realized was that New York could have 2 teams. Here in Chicago, there wasn't that base of fans that had that great dynasty with the Cubs, because they've stunk as long as the White Sox. Do you realize between the 2 teams, the Cubs and the White Sox, they actually went from 59 to, 2000, 45 to 2016 for the Cubs. So you're talking about 1655, 61 years without winning a pennant, right? You have the White Sox going from 1919 all the way to 59 without winning anything. So that's a stretch of 50 years. Right there is over 100 years of non-postseason baseball in Chicago. And then you add up the fact that both of them hadn't had a winner, a World Series champion, in almost 100 years. I mean, that's horrible. And now you add this team, the White Sox, a team that really is directionless. At least with that Met team of 62, you're saying, okay, got a lot of old guys. And maybe you're saying to yourself, you know what, maybe we can trade a couple of these pieces for young players and all the rest of it. I don't think the Mets really did that. They got lucky with Seaver, of course. They do build a team. And that's the other thing, too. In a space of 7 years, they're world champions. In a space of 8 seasons, 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Space of 8 seasons, they're a world championship team. And fashioning a great pitching staff, great defense, timely hitting type of ball club. Winning more games 3-2 than, 11-7. And you have a Hall of Fame pitcher, one of the greatest, maybe top 10, Tom Seaver, nicknamed, of course, the franchise, justifiably so. But all this is growing from that 62 Met team. In 64, the Mets, of course, move out. They move to Shea. Of course, their first starting all-star also starts in that game. That's Ron Hunt, who actually was a pretty good player in his own realm, too. Drew a lot of walks. Didn't have power, but he drew a lot of walks. Wasn't a particularly good fielder. He might be able to get by him. And, of course, he had the record for hit by pitches for so many years. But you can see where I'm going. The charm, nostalgia, love, romance of baseball, as opposed to kind of like the cold, cold corporate look that this White Sox team is giving off. And that's the real shame. And at the White Sox, this team is not really lovable. The 62 Mets were lovable for their ineptitude. Even when I watch the White Sox today, you become more infuriated with the mistakes they make. When you watch the Met teams or your highlights of those 62 Met teams, if you can find them, you just sit there in awe at how inept and how funny they can look losing all the games. I mean, 40, over 6. If baseball is April, May, June, July, August, and September, that's 6 months. You're not even winning 7 games a month. That means potentially you may win one. Well, actually, they were winning 1 out of every 4 games, 40 and 120. They didn't get to play. Maybe we can get this on, maybe a little loophole in the system. Mets only played 160 games. If the White Sox play 162 and they win 39, well, the Mets hold the record at least for the worst team playing 160 games. That's what I'd like to see. But all I got to say to White Sox, please win. Please win 41 games so that the Mets of 1962 can retain their crown as the most inept team in baseball history. This is Will O'Toole thanking you for joining me for another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. Till next week. Bye now.